And thank you all for staying for a beautiful night of Scottish tales and legends. I have one more story to share with you, and I just want you to know that over the hills behind me, I'm in Vista. So over the hills behind me is where Brengle Terrace Park is, where we would have been all joined together for the Highland Games. So we're as near to the in real life experience as we could make it. I've recently learned from Scottish tellers that we can attribute our storytelling tradition to having the storytellers who've told these stories before us over our shoulder. And this next story that I'm going to tell you has been told and molded for generations of storytellers. The earliest written one I could find was in the early 1900s by Donald Alexander Mackenzie. And it's gone up through Kate Forsyth and Tom Muir of the Orkney Islands and Duncan Williamson, the famous traveler, Scottish storyteller. And most recently, I heard it told by Richard Martin at our National Storytelling Network International Story Conference. And he told his version, and now I hope you'll listen to mine. You see, up in the very tip of Scotland, where the Orkney Islands are, there lived a family on one of the most remote and isolated islands. And they were, as so many of these folks were, fisher folk. And this particular family, as most of the people on the islands, did not hunt for seals because it was said that seals might easily be selkie, the fae, the fairy people who spend part of their time as seals and part of their time in human form, and you wouldn't want to make that mistake. But there happened to be one fishing family where there was a young lad named Robert, and he grew up and married and had two wee bairns, and then he lost his wife. And he moved his mother into his home to help take care of his family, and he would go out fishing, trying to feed them all. And it was a rough life, and it didn't always go well. And sometimes when he would bring up the nets, some of the fish and even some of the nets would show the unmistakable signs of seals' teeth having gnawed at them or broken straight through, nipped off the heads or the tails. And so this lad, like so many young men, started to think that everything his mother had taught him, and most especially the tales of the Selkie, were just that, fishwife tales. And one day he brought up his net and there was hardly any fish, and he looked over to the shore and he saw three young seals, and he went over and he got one. And he brought it home, and his mother would not let it in the house. He said, "Old woman, I don't care." And he sold that skin and started becoming a seal hunter to supplement his income. And he became known far and wide as Robert, the seal hunter. And one day, about a month after he had started hunting seals, he was out fishing again, and he lifted up his net and it was pulled down. And he looked over the side of the boat and he saw the largest seal he had ever seen. And he thought, "Oh, I'll get quite a bounty for that seal skin. The color is like nothing I've ever seen before, and it's such a big seal. It's the color of moonlight." And he jumped off the boat, dove into the water, took his fishing knife and stabbed the seal right underneath of its flipper and pulled the knife across the belly. And that seal turned and flashed a look at Robert with his green eyes of such intelligence and pain that Robert dropped the knife in shock, and the seal swam away, fogging the water with his blood, and he was gone before Robert could chase him down. He rowed back to shore. No fish, no sealskin, no knife. It was a sorry man who came home to his mother and bairns. And the look of reproach on the old woman's face as the next night and the next he came home with not so much as a minnow. On the third night, when he was mooring his boat after having caught not a fish and seen not a seal, he saw that a stranger was waiting for him. They were hooded and standing on the beach, and with them was two of the most beautiful ponies Robert had ever seen, midnight black with silver mane and tails, and a perfectly matched pair, mare and stallion. The woman, for a woman she was, took down her hood and said, "Are you Robert, the seal hunter?" And Robert said, "I have a buyer for your sealskins. He'll pay anything you ask." This woman was about his mother's age, and he said, good mother, I don't have any sealskins right now, and I don't know where I could find any seals." She said, "I can take you to a beach where there will be more and greater seals than you have ever seen in your life. Will you ride with me?" Well, of course, he climbed right onto that beautiful pony as she climbed onto the mare, and they took off, and Robert's breath was taken away. They were going so fast, it seemed like he had barely had time to blink 3 times before they were on the other side of the island, and he was way up on a path on the cliff, looking down at a tiny little strip of beach. And the woman dismounted from her pony and began to sing. Yang da, yang do, yang da yo da do, yang da, yang do, o ja, o da do, haya dong da, haya dong da, haya dong da, o da do. Oh, Dada. When she finished singing, Robert couldn't believe it. The water had boiled up with seals, beaching themselves on the rock and the strip of sand, and he turned to her to say, "How do we get down to the seals?" When suddenly, around his waist, he felt strong arms as the woman grabbed him and jumped off of the cliff. He barely had time to think that he wasn't dead when they broke the water before he was down on the floor of the ocean. And he found he was not drowning. He could breathe. But where the woman's arms had been now, a seal was dragging his shirt with her mouth toward a deeper, darker trench, as dark and as cold as midnight as they passed through it, with all those hundreds of seals behind them. When to his shock, he came up into a large cavern filled with people weeping. And as the seals came up behind them, they shed their skin and added their tears in human shape. The Selkie woman who had brought him there, for Selkie she was, pointed to a small rise at the end of the cavern. A young man with hair the silvery color of moonlight lay dying, bleeding from a gaping wound that ran from under his arm across his belly. The woman took a knife, and Robert thought, "I'm dead for sure. Is this your knife?" That is my son. And this is the knife that wounded him. You must heal him. I am not a doctor. Surely you must have healers of your own among your own people. Yours is the hand that made the wound, and only the hand that made it can heal. that wound. Robert walked over to the young man and he put his hands on either side of the wound. The skin was so cold. He thought, it's too late. He's already dead. Then the cold began to creep up Robert's hand and up his shoulder and into his lungs, along with all the pain the young man was feeling. It circled around Robert's heart and knocked him to his knees, but he did not take his hands from the flesh. And it began to knit itself together, healing under the arm and across the belly. And then there was a blinding flash, and it knocked Robert out. And when he came to, he was on that little strip of land underneath of the high cliff. And next to him was the woman, the Selkie who had brought him under the waves, standing with her 2 ponies and holding out his knife. Robert took the knife from her and raised it in solemnity. I will never harm a seal as long as I live, and neither will any of my kin. Good, said the woman, and thank you for healing my boy. But let it never be said that the Selkie would take away the livelihood of a man trying to feed his mother and 2 small bairns. Please take these ponies as my gift. They are a matched breeding pair, and I think you'll find they'll bring you more fortune than ever sealskin did. And so Robert kept his word. Sometimes he would go out fishing and his nets or the fish might be nibbled, and he would say to his children and his children's children, aye, and don't the Selkie deserve to live as much as we do?